Well, if you don't know who I am, I'm Andy. I'm an intern here. And when Chad asked if I would talk about what I learned in Exodus, I realized how much I had learned this year. But as I sat down and I asked what I had really learned and what messages spoke to me and what I'm still learning now, I think the theme of trust is what really defined my Exodus experience. When we started Exodus, I was starting my last semester of school. And I knew when I graduated I was going to come on staff at Second Mile and become an intern. And Exodus helped me see how Moses went when God asked him to go. Before East Asia, I went 2 years ago with the team Second Mile sent. Ministry wasn't something I was thinking about. But as I was there and as I started to feel led to go into ministry, and as I got back and I talked to Chad and realized that I was going to be moving in that direction, and as it came closer to actually happening, I knew I had to be like Moses and go when he asked me to go, or stay, because he was asking me to stay in Tucson. Something I hadn't thought about before this time when we went through Exodus was that Moses was 80 years old when he came across the burning bush. And as an 80-year-old, I don't think that he was thinking, I'm going to go lead the Israelites out of Egypt. But when God told him, hey, this is what I want you to do, he did ask, who am I? But he let God encourage him, and God told him, I'd be with you, and he went. And he followed this new plan God had on his life. As I was graduating, and my friends in the media arts program were asking if I was moving to LA or New York, because when you graduate with a film degree, you apparently have to move to one of those cities, I was discouraged as they questioned my decision to stay and work at a church. But I knew that was God's plan for me to stay here and start building the foundation of the youth ministry here. And there were times I asked, who am I, like Moses did, but reading through and seeing how God said he'd be with him, I knew God was with me in this plan too. I think something that helped me as I started the internship too was seeing Moses' leadership and seeing how he was committed to the Israelites, that they weren't an easy people to lead, but he loved them and he stuck with them through the hard times. Exodus 32:32, he said, he was talking to God. God was mad, and Moses was mad at the Israelites because they had just been worshiping the golden calf. And he asked God, but now, if you will forgive their sin, but if not, please blot me out of the book that you have written. And when I tried to wrap my head around that commitment and that love, and as we started going through Exodus and seeing Moses have a burden for his people, and I started praying what my burden was, I started what was the vision packet for the youth group's direction. And I started researching different statistics here in Tucson and looking at crime and different school districts. And I realized that God was putting the teens in Tucson on my heart, and it was an area that I wanted to impact. And as I looked at how Moses led the Israelites, I started to look at them as a people. And I started to ask very pridefully how the Israelites could not trust God. That they were the ones who saw the plagues. They were the ones who saw Moses part the Red Sea. They saw God give them manna when they were hungry, and when they were thirsty, God gave them water. But through everything, they complained and kept questioning God. And I realized this summer that I'm not, yeah, that's me. Sorry. I realized this summer that I'm not so different from the Israelites. Because of what I'm going to say is improper footwear. You may have noticed I was on crutches for a long time this summer. When the accident happened, the doctor told me I was going to be out of work and off my feet for 6 weeks. But I didn't really want to do that. I had plans. I wanted to have some fun activities with the youth group, do some capture the flag and some swimming. And I wasn't going to let a little severed tendon ruin my summer. So I pushed myself to heal it, to walk on it way too fast. And because I didn't trust God and thought my summer would be less fruitful working with the youth, and because I didn't trust God that I couldn't survive without my Applebee's paycheck, which is also where I work, I re-injured my foot and had to get surgery for a second time. What's dumb is a year ago I was working at a restaurant that closed overnight, that we were working one day and then the next day we were moving the furniture out. But God provided for me then. And 2 years ago, I came back from East Asia, and decided that I wasn't going to go back to working at Starbucks, and God provided for me then also. But I didn't think about those things when this happened. I was more concerned about my plans and what had happened to me, and everything was about I. And I think it's ironic that I was judging the Israelites for them forgetting about God and all he provided for them in 40 days when Moses was up on the mountain. And when the doctor told me I'd be on crutches for 6 weeks, it comes out to 42 days. So I forgot what God had provided for me in about a week after being derailed from my plan. And I forgot that God's bigger than foot injuries and crutches. When things weren't going the way I expected, I tried to fix them. And I know that my foot's not a big deal, that there are much worse things that could have happened. But it was a reminder of how easily I forgot that God provides and that he's given so much to me. And I don't want that to happen in the future. I don't want to drop something bigger than a motorcycle on my foot and not be able to have it heal. Exodus 16:32 says, Moses said, "This is what the Lord commanded. Let an omer of it be kept throughout your generations, so that you may see the bread with which I fed you in the wilderness, when I brought you out of the land of Egypt." God wants us to remember what he's provided for us. And what I remember about manna when Chad talked about it was that the way they described it, it was the best of the best, that it was the best tasting thing they compared it to of their time. And I want to remember how God's given me the best of the best and the great things that he's given me. I want to have my Omar of manna ready, so next time something happens, I don't go through 2 surgeries. And as we end this series of Exodus, and as I saw the tabernacle being finished in the last chapter, I just think about how big God's plan is and how through everything that happened in Exodus, his plan was complete. And how God has a plan for each one of us, and he has a plan for Second Mile and Seeds. And am I trusting that plan? Am I remembering how he provides for me when it's hard? The questions that I really took away from Exodus were, how are you trusting God? What are the things burdening your heart? And what is your manna? Or how has God provided for you, and do you remember these things regularly? I just ask that you guys pray about it and think what areas you're trusting God and what areas you might not be trusting God. And just think about through Exodus and see God's plan be complete. But that's all I got, so I'm going to ask Philip to come on up and tell you guys what he learned in Exodus.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Philip Brobeck, and I've been coming to Second Mile for about 2 years now. I originally followed Andrea here back when she was my girlfriend. We're now married as of 2 months ago, so woohoo. And we've been part of the Shemada's small group for about the past year, kind of coinciding about when we started studying Exodus, actually. We started going there, and I've seen, I guess, a lot of growth in myself since that time. I think there's actually a lot of value in reflecting back and looking where we've been over the past year. I know for myself, when I started thinking, how have I grown in the last year, it was hard at the beginning. I thought, oh, man, God is challenging me with these things right now. I feel like I haven't grown at all. But then I started remembering things like, oh, wow, that was within the last year. Yeah, okay, I've definitely grown from that. So anyway, a lot of it is related to this Exodus study that we did. So where was I a year ago? I was living at my parents' house, fairly new at my job. I just graduated from the U of A in May and started work soon after. I was engaged to Andrea, although I wasn't too concerned about planning wedding details yet. I was like, I still have 6 months after the Christmas break. That'll be enough time. And in a lot of ways, I was kind of just coasting along, deferring decisions till later. And to be honest, I was spending a lot of time playing World of Warcraft. And yeah. And so as we started Exodus, the setup chapters were a little bit hard for me to relate to. When I asked myself, what is my God-given burden? I was like, well, I don't really know. Or how do I react in times of suffering? I'm not really suffering. Things are okay. What do I do with that? But then we kind of started moving from where are you into where does God want you? and things started clicking a little better for me. At Moses' calling, the burning bush, he was kind of reluctant to leave the normalcy and the comfort of his life. And I could relate to that. I was feeling comfortable. I didn't have a whole lot of anything motivating me to suddenly change something. But then, of course, like maybe a week later or something, Chad hit us with that obedience is not comfort thing. And I was like, oh, yeah, I need to remember that. But I didn't grow up all of a sudden right then. It took a lot more time. I did start asking myself, though, how does God want me to be obedient in my life right now? And then over the weeks afterward, we had a bunch of questions that were really wonderful that Chad asked that were really challenging for me. Like, how is your pursuit of holiness? Is God trying to get your attention? What has been holding you in a snare? What are you purposefully delaying? What has God asked you that you refuse to obey? Are you ignoring the promptings of the Holy Spirit? How often do you find yourself ignoring the obvious conclusion? What is God asking of you? Why are you continuing to stubbornly ignore? How attached are you to your current way of life? What would it require for you to drastically change your existence overnight? What long-established habits or patterns is God asking you to walk away from? And this may seem kind of silly, but in my life at the time, there was a pretty obvious answer to all those questions for me that I kind of knew beforehand, but having them all asked just made it firmer. I knew that I was using up too much time and focus playing video games. It was a long-established pattern. I'd been playing World of Warcraft since high school even, and I'd been very accustomed to it and comfortable in it, but I began to realize that it was preventing me from knowing God's heart and doing His will simply by crowding Him out of my life. So, God had made it clear what He wanted of me. And I know it seems like a big simplification of all the events that happened in the first 12 chapters of Exodus, but that's kind of what I got out of it. And it took me a little bit longer after that to kind of come to the decision that, you know, that's it, I'm going to stop playing this game. But I did. And I would say that that's when my real growth kind of began as we came into 2012. So when we came back after Christmas, my focus was quickly diverted to my upcoming marriage to Andrea. I suddenly realized it was high time to plan through all the things that I'd kind of left before when I was just coasting through. I needed to move out. I needed to figure out the details of our honeymoon. I needed to deal with all the other details of our wedding that still hadn't been taken care of. So I still kind of wanted to have that comfortableness, but I at least had gained a little bit of momentum with the decision that it was time to start being more responsible for things. In that time, the thought of marriage was really kind of influencing the way that I was reading Exodus, the way that I was taking in everything during those times. So as we went through the challenges that Moses and the Israelites faced in the early times in the desert, I was kind of thinking about two things. First of all, like Moses was a good leader to the people, I want to be a good spiritual leader in my relationship with Andrea when we're married. And then the second thought was, man, those Israelites sure don't get it. Why is it so hard for them? Kind of like Andy was saying. And I mean, in the same ways that Andy shared, before they're brought out of Egypt, they think that, oh, you know, who's this God anyway, whatever. And then they don't know how they're going to get food, and even after God provides food in such a miraculous way, all of a sudden they're like, oh, we're going to die because we don't have water, not expecting Him to come forth and bring water out. And then later, when Moses goes up the mountain and spends his 40 days and nights up there and comes back down, they have this golden calf that they've prepared, just kind of completely defiant of everything that God wants for them. So I kept wondering, you know, what is really so hard about honoring God instead of questioning and offending Him? Skip forward to marrying Andrea 2 months ago. I had felt very prepared for marriage and thought I'd have a fairly easy time adjusting. I'd read a lot of books. I dated Andrea for 3 years, which is a pretty good long time. And we'd done premarital counseling. You know, we'd been through the normal things. I thought I was going to be an awesome husband, and I thought if I just stayed on my current track that, you know, I wouldn't have too much more to figure out in that early stage. Well, after I did get married, it didn't take me very long to figure out that there was a lot I didn't know about loving her and living with her. So, like one particular instance where it really grabbed me and made me realize things is when Andrea, she had just graduated from the U of A this May and has a degree in early childhood education, and she just started teaching first grade in the Vail School District in July. And I knew that when she first started this job, I intended to be very encouraging and supportive, and I knew that she was going to be pretty focused on school for a time, and that would kind of come up a lot at home and everything. And I knew that she would need extra love and encouragement since she had a lot going on and needed my full support. I felt ready and prepped for my first husband test. But then, about halfway through that first week of her teaching her class, I had developed a crabby attitude because I felt like Andrea was just being a teacher all the time. I had heard all about her kids and all about her coworkers in her classroom, and I don't know, I just kind of wanted things back to normal, I guess. And I realized that despite all my mental preparation, I knew exactly what was coming, and I still failed to have the right response, the right loving response. And suddenly, in that, I could relate a lot better to the Israelites. They were unaccustomed to having God so near and present. They were learning to live with Him, kind of like I was learning to live with Andrea. And even though I, to be honest, was actually decently well prepared for marriage, as far as preparation can get you, it still didn't prevent me from doing my job as a husband poorly. I'd say the Israelites probably had even less preparation than that in some ways. They had kind of forgotten in some ways. And so, of course, they messed up. It was a humbling experience for me. I still feel like I'm back to the basics of loving Andrea, but at least now I know that I need to be vigilant and always look for new ways to grow and be a better husband. So looking at Exodus, though, it sure makes me realize how incredible God is and how astounding that love is, that He is perfectly constant and loves us completely. And His actions demonstrated it as He gave to them, He forgave them, and remained faithful to them no matter what happened. I wish that I could be as always loving as He is. But how do I do that? Something that's been on my heart recently is I realized throughout the entire Exodus experience that God has been working on me and asking why I don't trust and depend on Him fully. In my marriage, I realized that full trust and dependence in God is the only way that I can love Andrea because He's the perfect example of love. I alone can't achieve always love. I'd like to be able to, but I'm just not cut out for it. But when God is guiding my actions, He can help me to love Andrea the way He does. I know from my past experiences, like last year, like I shared, that God has better things planned for me when I follow what He wants instead of kind of going along with my own whims. And I know that in my role in increasing God's glory, I need my life to be fully guided by Him, because when I have my own plans, conflicts arise with what God wants. There's just not enough space for two people to be making the plans. He showed us through the experience of the Israelites that it is only through full trust that life is fully lived. And honestly, I'm still having trouble with this. I know that my life is too comfortable and that there are many ways that I need to learn obedience and become closer to Jesus. I would ask all of you to please pray that I can fully hand over the reins. And if any of you are feeling like you're kind of in the same boat, in the same having the same thoughts, please talk to me, Facebook me, whatever. I would love to be able to pray for you and encourage you. So, thank you. Julie will share next.
Well, last August when Chad began the series and the very first night that he introduced Exodus, I had to laugh, hopefully not out loud, I don't remember, but I remember chuckling to myself and going, oh no. I knew enough about Exodus that it was a journey and that the people of Israel were going to be taken out of a terrible situation, and that they were going to be put to test over and over of trusting God, as already has been mentioned. And so I remember laughing, and I thought, Lord, I don't know what you're doing, but there's only one thing to do, which is move forward. I have been on quite a life journey, and it seems like in the last 3 years that journey has kicked up a notch of having to deal with a lot of junk of my past, both from my childhood, but then also my own personal response to the painful experiences that I had. And so this past a year ago, last summer, I was at a good pit. If I had to chart my life, last summer was at the bottom of the barrel kind of summer. And so starting Exodus and getting into this journey with the Israelites, I feel like I'm with them. Everything, yeah, I understand what you guys are going through. January 8th is when Chad mentioned Exodus 14 and 15, and the title of his message for that night was Solidifying the Greatness of Yahweh. And if you remember, Exodus 14 is immediately after the Israelites left Egypt. It was very quickly after that. And the Israelites had already experienced multitudes of God's miracles and his display of his power over and over through the plagues and through convincing Pharaoh or trying to convince Pharaoh. Through Moses, God was using Moses. And over they were trying to understand, and be a part of what God was doing. But they missed out. They were, as has already been mentioned, the Israelites were very forgetful. I think the whole experience of God was brand new to them because they had already experienced so much abandonment of God while they were in the slavery and oppression and abuse of Egypt. And so when we got to Exodus 14, solidifying the greatness of Yahweh, that chapter in Exodus 14, let me introduce you first to my stick figures. I'm not a doodler, but last December, I feel like God was preparing me for Exodus 14, and I am a visual learner. And I knew at that particular time, December's crazy. I don't know about you, but December's a crazy month. And I thought, the best I know how, I'm going to draw this out so I can understand a little bit more. When I look at this, you see the Egyptians, they are about to pursue the Israelites. And I really see that as just representing their past. They are looking at their past coming at them again. And, God told them in Exodus 14:2, God told them, Moses, no, don't go the easy route. I want you to go ahead and camp by the Red Sea. And if the Red Sea is not a small body of water, and I'm going to have the Egyptians chase you guys. And so basically, the Israelites are between a rock and a hard place, basically. And they're in the middle, looking at their situation, and when they look towards the sea, there's no hope there. And when they look towards their past, there's no hope there. But they can see their past coming to sneak up and capture them again. And it's very interesting the response that they give at this time. Exodus 14 verses 10 through 12 says, As Pharaoh approached, the people of Israel looked up and panicked when they saw the Egyptians overtaking them. They cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, Why did you bring us out here to die in the wilderness? Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt? What have you done to us? Why did you make us leave Egypt? Didn't we tell you this would happen while we were still in Egypt? We said, Leave us alone. Let us be slaves to the Egyptians. It's better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness. They were hopeless in that place, extremely hopeless. and barking at God and barking at Moses and saying, why didn't you just leave us? Because the oppression and the slavery and the lies and the powerlessness and the shame, we like that. The comfortableness of the past was better than the hopelessness of their future. But God planted them right there in that seemingly hopeless spot so that he could bring them to a place of solidifying his greatness in their lives once again. Moses' response to their fear is outstanding. But Moses told the people, don't be afraid, just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today. The Egyptians you see today will never be seen again. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm. This is the New Living Translation, and I love it. Yeah, right, Moses. Just stay calm. What is that? The London signs, be calm, stay calm. I forget how it goes. Remain calm, I don't know. And God was telling Moses to tell the people this. You know, Moses by this time was becoming a seasoned leader of doing the impossible. And so he was relaying to his people saying, be calm, just stay calm. See the glory of God. See him display his greatness once again. God often wants to bring us to a place where our only option is him. He will lead us out of denial and lead us into truth. Our job is to let him rescue. Our job is to stay calm. Medication kind of helps for that a lot of times. He wants us to stay calm to solidify his greatness in our life. Our impossible situation is an opportunity for God to be great in our lives. One of my favorite movies is actually a cartoon, and it's called The Prince of Egypt. It's kind of dated, so the last time I saw it this summer, it was looking a little old, okay? But nonetheless, I think from every year that it came out, that I have watched it at least once. It is the story of Moses and his life and him bringing the Israelites out of Egypt. And I just love it. I don't know if it's a little kid brain going, I can grasp this. And being able to see it in the vividness of the colors and the action, and that Moses was a real guy who had a brother and loved his brother. And I just love that movie. And one of the best parts of that movie is at the very end. You know, Moses stands at the Red Sea, trusts God once again, and God parts the water. And there's water, walls of water just shooting up so high. And there's a path that goes right through it. And Moses begins to lead the way through that path. But one of the best parts of that visual in that movie is that when the walls of water go up, they show these massive sea creatures in the wall of water that just kind of come up and then move back out. And so they're like walking through a sea. And I don't know about you, but those fish were really big. And they were actually kind of scary. I'm not quite sure I'd still feel real safe on that path. You know, but they made it through. They walked to the very end. And the water came down. The Egyptians tried to follow them. And God destroyed their enemy, their biggest enemy. Now, I wouldn't quite say that I'm personally on the other side. I feel like I'm on that path. God has parted the waters, but the path is still really, really, really long. And I get a little, claustrophobic. And if I'm seeing walls of water on my sides and these creatures coming at me, it's still a little overwhelming and still a little scary. But I know that at the end that God is going to be glorified in what he has decided that my life journey is supposed to be. Exodus 14:31 says, "When the people of Israel saw the mighty power that the Lord had unleashed against the Egyptians, they were filled with awe before him. They put their faith in the Lord and in his servant Moses." You know, they once again, their faith had to be tried, their faith had to be tested, and they had to come out at the other end in awe, once again, of a mighty God. You know, to emphasize what God was trying to do through their suffering, through their abuse, through their shame. Exodus 14:17 says, "And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they will charge in after the Israelites. My great glory will be displayed through Pharaoh and his troops, his chariots, and his charioteers." I think it's very interesting that God chose to bring glory to himself through their enemy and through the junk of their past. When they were out of denial, they didn't walk through the Nile. That would have been really cool. It was the Red Sea. But when they walked out through the Red Sea, God was able to bring himself glory. And all God wanted them to do was just stay calm. Philippians 1:6 is one of my favorite verses, and it gives me great encouragement all the time. And it's, "He who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it." Thanks.
My name's Shannon Hutter, and just to forewarn you, I might cry during this message because I am an ENFP, and it's normal for me to get emotional and I'm excited and all in the same thing. So anyway, this has been actually really interesting to hear everyone's journey through Exodus, and I bet here tonight there's so many more things that maybe have surfaced since we've had different people share, because as I heard the different stories from the people that have been up here so far, I'm starting to feel a lot of wrestling in my heart, and I'm starting to see a lot of pain. I'm seeing a lot of joy at the same time. But just to give you a quick snapshot, I'm a Michigan boy. I'm a Detroit Lions fan, even when they win. Woo! Yes. Actually, we did win a little bit last year. But we moved here in 2009. It was kind of interesting. I was working 5 jobs. My wife was working. We were trying to stay afloat. We've never owned a home. We've always rented, so we've been pretty mobile our whole lives. But we came to this point where we just kind of knew God was moving us somewhere, that we were supposed to do something, and the whole church planting thing was on our brain. And so Tucson became this place that was drawing us for some reason. And I remember sitting at my computer doing demographics on Tucson and seeing that 90% of the population is unchurched, which is completely different than in Michigan. And I remember seeing this, and my heart was just broken, and it was gripped. So I knew my wife was serious about this move when there was a note by the coffee pot. If you ever want to get my attention, she always puts a note by the coffee pot, because I frequent there a lot. Anyway, it said, "I booked you a one-way ticket to Tucson to go find a job." I'm like, sweet. Got to get a job. That's an important thing when you have a family with 4 kids and a wife. So anyway, we moved to Tucson, and I got a job at a church in town, being a children and youth pastor. And I've been doing youth ministry and children's ministry for a long time. I've worked with youth for over 20 years in different capacities. So we're at this church, and things are going really well. And then, lo and behold, we're sitting there like, this is really cool. Tucson seems to be the place that we're going to settle in. And finally, in July of last year, we decided we're going to buy a house. We're so excited. And then in August, I found out the church is letting me go because they didn't have the finances to support 2 staff. So you can imagine some of the whirlwinds in our heads and things. But anyway, through that process, after we were no longer there, we had heard about Second Mile. And I had heard, about the teaching and the community, so we had to check it out, and that's how we ended up here. So just wanted to give you a little brief snapshot there. But one of the things when Chad asked me to talk about Exodus, there's so many themes in Exodus. How in the world can you take 10 to 12 minutes to express your heart and your just appreciation for God's word in Exodus? So two things really stood out at me through this book. One is movement, and one is tension. I see movement and I see tension. I see movement in my life, how God has been moving me from one place to another, and I see tension, constant tension, a struggle with different things. So let me just share three stories from Exodus that really gripped me. Moses at the burning bush. I mean, if a burning bush is not enough, I mean, seriously, come on. I'd like to think that I was different, but I know I'm not. But a burning bush, Moses is here having a conversation with Yahweh in the burning bush. And just hearing Moses' thoughts and all the excuses Moses gives of why he can't do what God's calling him to do. And so I guess the tension that I had as I read this story over and over again was a reliance on self and my own strengths versus trusting God to equip me if I'm called. And I don't know if you've ever had those experiences where you have your own strengths and you do the own things and you're good at things and you just keep doing them, which is good. But sometimes God asks us to do something completely out of the comfort zone of our lives. God asks us to do things that are completely out of our strength base sometimes. And I love strengths tests and I love gifts and knowing what your spiritual gifts are. But it's interesting sometimes when God helps us discover something that we don't know we even have. And it's not because of us, but because of him. So here I am, thinking through this whole thing of Moses, and I'm making excuses, and Moses is like, well, I stutter, and I can't do this. And who should I say sends me if they ask, who is this? And I mean, the excuse goes on and on and on. We all have excuses, and I have so many excuses, and I've been relying on my own strengths. Well, then I think about the idea of trusting in God to equip me with things maybe I didn't even know I had. So I guess the question is, am I living a self-directed life, putting stock in my own abilities, or am I trusting that if God has truly called me to something, that he will truly equip me? I'm pretty sure the disciples, when Jesus first called them, I can't imagine Jesus walking along the shore going, hey guys, did you guys complete that StrengthsFinder test? Or did you do that spiritual gifts assessment? It just didn't work that way. He was calling them out of fishing into becoming fishers of men. So he's always calling us into something, and many times it's uncomfortable. And there's many times when Chad would speak that I wanted to throw something at him because it was so frustrating, because I'm going, how did he know? How did he know? That's what I'm struggling with. But see, God knows. And there's times that he is calling us out of our comfort zones to do something great. Another point was when they're in the desert, they've survived the whole Egyptian army and they've drowned and they're there and they're in the desert now. And I find it interesting that here they are grumbling and complaining. In Exodus 16, in verse 2, it says, the whole congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. Then it says, the sons of Israel said to them, would that we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt when we sat by the pots of meat, when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Here they are, seeing all these miracles of God, and they're sitting there. The tension in this, I think, is there's a pull of the past versus the uncertainty of the unknown. And I was experiencing this, and I still experience this sometimes. There's a pull to the past. Like we always say things like, or maybe you don't, but I say things like, boy, life was better then. There's times I'm like, sometimes I might say this, but, I wish I could go back to Michigan, not really Michigan, but maybe just leaving the present circumstance that I'm in. There's a pull to the past, and I think it was in Julie's story, it was really interesting. It kind of made me think a little bit, like sometimes there's not a pull at all to the past because it's so painful, and it hurts, and it grips our heart, and we want to avoid the past. And I was so gripped by your story about the Egyptian army being the past and being there. But I think there's also an allurement to the past. Things are always better in the past, and we think that way, and I think that way, because I think really deep down what I'm saying is I don't trust God. There's this uncertainty of the future that I don't know, and I just don't trust God to do what he's going to do. And so the question that kept resonating in my brain over and over again is, what makes the past so alluring and the future so scary? What makes the past so alluring sometimes? And what makes the future so scary? I don't know if I have an answer to the question. It's just something that I keep thinking about, because many times I find myself in a situation where I've just witnessed God doing great things in my life, and I sit there at the crossroads and say, God, it would have been better if I would have just been over there. If I could have just stayed there, it would have been so much better. But you know what? God is about movement. He's always moving us from here to there, whether it be from reliance on our own strengths to trusting him, or relieving or not reliving the past and moving back to the past, but he's moving us toward the unknown where it causes us to trust. And I think the last part of Exodus that really gripped me was the building of the tabernacle, the ornateness of it. And just when you hear about the beautiful people who are creative and who constructed this beautiful thing where God's presence was there, it's so beautiful. But the thing that gripped me the most about the tabernacle was the fact that it was mobile. The tabernacle was mobile. I mean, it had to be set up quickly, and it had to be torn down quickly. So the tension for me, when I read this story over and over again, is contentment in where God has me. You know, not grumbling and complaining, but the contentment to say, okay, God, I know where you have me right now, and I'm content, and I'm going to trust you. I thank you for where I'm at. And the other side of the coin of the tension is the readiness and eagerness to pack up and follow where God may take us. That is the hardest one for me out of all the three, because I'm a very future-focused person. I'm kind of a vision person, and I have big dreams for the future, and sometimes I get really upset with where I'm at. And I don't know if you can resonate with that. But there's times in my life, here I'm starting to cry because I'm in EFP. Sometimes in my life, I get so frustrated because I'm like, God, this is not working out the way I intended it. I mean, I had big grandeur hopes for this and this, but now God has me right here in the middle. One thing right now that just is, my life's in a whirlwind right now. So I did a summer camp all summer, and I thought I was going to be a PE teacher at Collier Elementary School, working 3 days a week and have 2 days off to do some different things that I wanted to pursue. And then, we're praying that God would provide for us financially, because, the summer was a little rough. And so we're praying, and then Friday comes, and I get pulled in the office of the principal. I wasn't in trouble, by the way. Doesn't always mean you're in trouble if you get pulled in the principal's office. I got pulled in the principal's office, and he asked me if I would interview for this fifth grade teaching job. Well, I got it. I mean, my life has been turned upside down. I mean, trying to prepare all these different lesson plans and things that I wasn't expecting. And what it really taught me was, just like the tabernacle, we need to be mobile. Can we be ready and eager to move where God calls us? When God says move, when the cloud of fire, the pillar of fire and the cloud would move, the people would pack up and they would move. And so I guess that's for me. And I guess the one question I had was, what tent stakes are holding me down? What tent stakes in my life are holding me down from experiencing what God has called me to do? I can still be content in the present, but yet be so eager and excited for what God has in store. So just in closing, I realize that this whole thing of Exodus, when it talks about movement and tension, is just really the story of Jesus. It's a movement from slavery of sin to freedom. That's the one thing that I think God has gripped me with the most, is that Exodus, the Passover, is all about the Passover lamb. When John said, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world," it's all about movement. It's movement from being lost in sin to being free in Christ. And the cross, the words that just, when Chad mentioned this, and this is what I'm closing with, Jesus said on the cross, "It is finished." And no matter what our life circumstances, the momentum, the movement, the tension in our life, I cling to those words. It is finished. There's nothing more that can be done because he's done it on the cross. And so I hope that you cling to that and realize that regardless of the tension or the movement God has you in life, that it is Jesus who makes it all possible and complete. So thanks for listening.
Thanks, guys. You continue to just bless me as I hear what you are learning and what God has been processing. I just would love to be in all of your living rooms hearing what God has done in your life through the series of Exodus. We're going to pray, and then we're going to move into it.